This is the weekend edition of Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Sean Aylmer and good morning, Adam Lang.
Good morning, Sean.
Now, Adam is filling in for Michael Thompson, who's busy giving best man speeches at his brother's wedding. Regular listeners would know that the weekend show is all about, well, normally Michael and I nominating what we think is the biggest story of the week, the most remarkable story, the sleeper story, and our favourite story. Adam is usually the adjudicator, but today he's both judge and jury. He gets to nominate and then decide who has the better story, him or I. Now, Adam, I think it's a mark of my respect for you and my belief in your honesty that I'm prepared to allow you to judge as well.
Well, thank you very much. It's a weight and responsibility I take very seriously, as I'm sure you would imagine.
Yes, now, of course, if Michael was involved in this, there is no way in the world I'd let him judge it.
I'll take it. I'll take it as praise.
Absolutely. Righto, let's jump into it. The biggest story of the week, I'm going to go first if that's okay.
Of course, yeah.
I actually think there's only one major story this week. Inflation, inflation, inflation. For the 3 months to the end of March, Australia's annual inflation rate, according to the Bureau of Statistics figures released this week, was 5.1%. Not since the GST pushed up prices 10% back in 2000 have we seen such a big jump. All sorts of items are rising in price. Housing, fuel, food, education. Underlying inflation was running at 3.7%. Both are well above the Reserve Bank's target range, and the consensus view is that as a result of the figures this week, the Reserve Bank will lift interest rates on Tuesday when the board meets. Now, that's in the middle of an election campaign. It will be the first rise since November 2010. If it doesn't happen next week, it will almost certainly happen next month. Adam, easily the biggest story of the week.
Well, let's see, Sean. So like any federal election process, campaigning becomes a crucible of different stories as politicians lobby for our nation's votes. And that campaign crucible has been, for me, the biggest story of the week. Anzac Day, the end of school holidays, Anthony Albanese in and out of COVID isolation, front bench teams stepping up alongside their leaders in the campaign, green energy arm wrestles, a record inflation figure on Wednesday, as you said, 20-year high, stoking the flames of cost of living pressures and the ramifications of that Solomon Islands China Security Pact. They all played out, and all of it dominated the television screens, radio stations, web pages, and podcast sound waves all week. Now, we know politics is a brutal game, and clearly our nation gobbles it up as the biggest story of the week. Now, as I say that, Sean, now I have to judge both of our stories, despite trying to give mine with gusto. I think you win.
Yeah. It's a bit of a no-brainer, this one, because the election runs for 6 weeks. But I really appreciate the effort you put in to make the election sound more interesting than what it actually was.
Maybe I oversold it. I'll do better on the next one.
Well, why don't you start? So the next one is the most remarkable story. Off you go.
All right. The story that is most remarkable to me, Sean, this week is actually in a terrible way. And this is something of a change of pace. So we know it's going on. This week, the Russian war on Ukraine entered its second month. On 24 February this year, the invasion began. The devastation is ghastly, and we continue to receive reports of heinous acts and allegations of war crimes. It's truly awful. I think it would be remarkable to Russian President Vladimir Putin that he's not yet won the war. But after 2 months, the battles continue. And amongst that, what I found particularly remarkable was that US Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrived in Kiev for talks with Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky. Now, that international diplomacy can be enacted after 2 months of the Ukraine war. To me, this week is remarkable.
Fair enough. Let me give you my entry.
I'm listening.
I think it's remarkable that James Packer is giving up on Crown Resorts. There was a story this week that Mr. Packer will vote his 37% stake in the gaming giant for the takeover by Blackstone. Mr. Packer's been involved in Crown for 20 years. In many ways, it's his legacy. His father, Kerry, was all about TV, and James is all about gaming. He tilted the company that way, and he was right. Totally right. He fought tooth and nail for the 72-storey Baringaroo Hotel, restaurant and apartment complex in Sydney, which really has already become a landmark for the city. Hasn't got a casino licence yet, but it will. Mr. Pack has been forced to sell down his stake in Crown following several state inquiries. But I still think it is remarkable he's going out without more of a fight. He has spent his life fighting for Crown, and now it's almost all over. Remarkable.
It is remarkable, Sean, and I know it was one of James Packer's almost life quests that he left an emblem in Sydney, and he's done that. But as you say, he's walking away from it. I think in a business context, and certainly in an Australian context, that's the biggest and most remarkable story of the week for me, with a nod to just what's going on over in Ukraine.
I'm liking you because the thing about you, Adam, is you are such a nice guy that I think you will have a bias away from yourself.
I'll make it difficult for myself. That's good. Well, let's see how I go on the next couple of stories.
Righto. So you kick us off on the sleeper story of the week.
All right. And now, look, for me, this is a massive story that got noticed, but it's getting nowhere near the traction it should get, and certainly will get, I think, in the future. So 2 weeks ago, the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority sent out proposed guidelines for monitoring the US $1 trillion cryptocurrency market. You've spoken about this, Sean, and this week you reported that the government's financial intelligence agency, AUSTRAC, issued banks and digital currency exchanges with a financial crime guide to enhance due diligence on cryptocurrency assets. Now, because cryptocurrency deals are generally anonymous and borderless, they are ripe to facilitate serious crime. AUSTRAC is concerned about money laundering, purchase of illicit products on the dark net, terrorism, financing scams, tax evasion and ransomware, just a few serious things to worry about. Anonymous and borderless cryptocurrencies, Australian regulation increasing. Watch for this sleeper story growing further and further into international territory in the months ahead. And that's why it's a sleeper story for me this week.
Yeah, good entry, that one. I think it's a very, very big story over the next few years. Look, for me, the sleeper story of the week is the one about how many people cheat on their home loan applications. More than a third do so. In fact, it was 37%, according to the 7th Australian Mortgage Survey from UBS. And ANZ borrowers seem to make more mistakes, shall we call them, than anyone else. More than half of respondents to the survey that had taken out a mortgage with ANZ in the 6 months to the end of last year indicated they'd lied in their application document. The next highest number admitting misstating facts were using Westpac at 40%, Commonwealth Bank was at 30%, and National Australia Bank was at 20% or 19% in fact. An ANZ spokesperson was quoted as saying lending arrears at the bank is better than its competitors. That suggests that ANZ loans are good loans. It surprises me, it's a bit of a sleeper, that so many people cheat on their applications, but that's not the real reason why I think it is a sleeper story. Bad debts are a killer for banks. Now, banks make money lending to people, and it really hasn't been such a problem in recent years with low and falling interest rates. We all know how hot the housing market's been, and people are paying up big for home loans. As the cycle turns and rates rise, people who cheated on their home loan applications might just find themselves in a little bit of trouble financing those huge loans they took out for those big houses across the country. That's really bad news for banks. We haven't lived in a rising interest rate environment for more than a decade. When this happens, we might find bank arrears rising, and that's really bad for bank profits and for shareholders. That's why, for me, it's the sleeper story of the week.
So, Sean, have you ever heard of the expression hoisted by their own petard?
Yes.
It's where you blow yourself up. And as what I felt as you said your sleeper story for the week, because I'm going to use my own criteria to judge you the winner, which is to say cryptocurrencies is really interesting, US $2 trillion, but it doesn't affect that many people. And so in terms of the breadth of the impact, your story about how many people, as you say, cheat, not misstated, but cheat on their home loan applications, That is huge. And it was a really big story. And like you said, rising interest rates, if they've put themselves in a bit of extra risk, hoping that the market would keep going up, that could be a massive sleeper story. So
I'm loving this. Michael Thompson is not getting an invite back. You, Adam, are my favourite person at the moment. Let's get on to the favourite story.
Geez, I hope I bring something good in the next one.
I'll start off this time, right?
Okay.
I love the story around Mattel, the toy maker, home of Barbie and Ken, of course, Hot Wheels, and the Fisher-Price brand. It's been a great turnaround story. It's profitable again. Over the past few years, it's shed about 1/3 of its workforce and revamped its manufacturing processes. This week, it reported its strongest first quarter earnings on record. In fact, there are media reports now that private equity groups are stalking the $8 billion company. It's a storied company. It's pushed its brands beyond toys into films and television. There's a new Barbie film coming next year with Aussie actress Margot Robbie, something to really look forward to. It's just a great turnaround story. Love it.
It is an excellent favourite.
Okay, beat Barbie.
All right. So
beat Barbie. Come on.
I've got one. Elon toying with Twitter.
Oh, I think you've beaten me already.
Now, who doesn't love a story about our favourite eccentric multi-billionaire Elon Musk? The richest man in the world kicks this story off with a 9% stake in Twitter. Then he dropped some cryptic hints to his 80 million Twitter followers and launched a full bid for the company. So some thought the SpaceX Avenger was joking, but no, he was just getting started. And 1 week ago, we learned that Elon Musk secured funding worth US $46 billion in his quest to take over the 16-year-old Twitter completely. Now, Twitter accepted the bid, so now it's time to pay. And Tesla's inimitable CEO is due a very hefty quarterly bonus from that company, which is expected to be more than enough to fund $21 billion. Another $12.5 billion is through a loan against his shares in Tesla, and US investment bank Morgan Stanley led the funding for the remaining $13 billion. Now the spectator sport, that is Elon Musk, has turned focus onto what on earth he will do with Twitter as a forceful advocate of free speech, and how will he manage Tesla investor concerns on their declining share price. What a spectacle. And that's why it's my favourite.
Adam, I'm not even going to let you judge this one. That is such a good story. You win that one hands down.
It's difficult to have a winning favourite, but I think it's amazing. So, yeah, all right, we'll go with Elon. I get a concessionary 3 to you, 1 to me.
Yes. Thank you for joining us, Adam. Michael will be back next week, but I'm really liking the idea of you being judge and jury because you downplay yourself. It's good. Thank you.
I feel conflicted and a bit exhausted now, actually.
Good. Well, go and have a Bex and lie down. Just a reminder about our weekly podcast called Safe Word by Fear and Greed, where Adam, Michael and I have a lighter look at some of the business news around the place. It now lives on its own outside the main Fear and Greed playlist, so you need to search for it on your podcast platform. Just look for Safe Word by Fear and Greed on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts and hit follow so you get it every week. I'm Sean Aylmer. Have a great weekend.